Hello, welcome to my video, and here I'm going to cover the game between Shakhriyar Mamedyarov and Richard Rapport from the round 2 of Superbet Chess Classic, which is held in Bucharest. And it was a crazy game, just to say really shortly, and you will see why. It was round 2. In round 1, Mamedyarov lost against Wesley So in some opposite color bishops, ending with queens on the board, and he couldn't manage to defend this position, while Rapport had a pretty safe game against Levon Aronian, and he drew the game. And now Mamedyarov tried to recover from this, and he began with e4, and now Rapport answered with e6, which he usually plays. Besides e6, he usually plays the Sicilian, some Taimanov, but something strange, not really the main lines. And we have d4, d5, knight c3, and Rapport chose knight c6, which is a very, very rare move. I've never seen it in a top level chess. It's not considered the main move because it simply doesn't fight for the center by a move like c5. And usually the knight belongs to d7, or first black plays c5, then knight c6. And Mamedyarov could have played knight f3 and continued his play, but maybe he was slightly concerned about knight f6, and if he pushes now e5, there's knight e4, and you cannot capture on e4 because now d4 becomes weak, so black would exchange a pair of knights pretty comfortably, I suppose. And it would make white's life much easier, but he chose to play e5 instantly and to make black's position slightly cramped, which is something that forced Rapport to just do a typical French break with f6, trying to challenge this pawn and to break the center. And this is why Mamedyarov tries to pin the knight by bishop b5, and in case of some fe5, there are lots of options. Maybe this check on h5, and after this to just capture on e5. Looks very, very tempting. And in that case, black's structure would be slightly compromised. So he chose to unpin, but not really, because he puts the queen on d7. His idea is to push a6 and to somehow force the matters, because when you push a6 as black, you will push b5 if bishop a4. So for example, if you go knight f3 like Mamedyarov did, a6, if you go bishop a4, black has b5 to unpin, and he would be able to capture on e5 at some point. Do something like this, and then develop knight e7, knight g6, and the bishop on b3 would be quite suspicious. So after a6, which was played, white took on c6. He had to give up the bishop pair, but keep the momentum going. Now queen takes, doesn't want to shatter his pawn structure, and now Mamedyarov castles. And after the game, in the interview, he mentioned that after he castled, after he played short castle, he saw that maybe ef6 was an option, and he was right. It was an option. If knight f6, well, that simply doesn't make sense positionally speaking, because it allows knight e5 quite comfortably, and white has a very decent, more than decent play. So gf6 would be quite logical to stop these jumps 95, knight g5, but actually in this case white would have 95 anyway. And if fe, which is the forced move, because if queen d6 you have a check on h5 and things pretty soon collapse because of knight f7 and forking the queen and the rook. So fe is pretty much forced, and now white can give a check on h5. Now king d8 is impossible because of queen takes e5 and you will lose the rook. So king e7 is the only move, because now if you take on e5 there's knight f6 and you can keep things pretty much safe. So after king e7, bishop g5 is very strong. And once the fifth rank is blocked for the queen, now the king can go to d7 freely. Of course, if knight f6, there is this issue with d5 and bishop f6 next. So king d7 is also, I think, the only move. But then queen comes to f7, bishop e7, d5, and even though black is a piece up, it's not so easy for him to continue playing, and white's gonna continue with the long castle, knight e4, or just h4, rook h3, and bring all the forces, while black is pretty tangled, and it's not easy to suggest anything, any move in this position. He can try playing b5 and try to untangle by bishop b7, but like I told, white can castle, and if bishop b7, h4 just to defend the bishop, so the queen can maybe go. And you also have ideas like knight e4, knight f6 next, so it's a very, very unpleasant situation for black. And it looked very promising for white, of course. But I think that this was the case of automatic move, and the short castle is such a move that you can make pretty much without thinking. And after castling, still white is the one who has a slight edge because of the potential ef6 and ruining the pawn structure. Also, the king is still in the center. The pieces are not developed properly, so black still has to spend time to develop. He tries with knight e7. This is his issue, because he would like to get something like knight f6 in, but the pawn on e5 is just squeezing black, and it's causing some trouble for black. Now Shak took on f6, gf, and now knight h4, with the idea of giving check and ruining black's castling rights. That's why Rapport plays the only move that doesn't allow the check. If you play knight g6, then there is queen h5 and the pin is just too strong, and black is at least losing a pawn, which is not acceptable. So h5 is the only move. Now queen f3. White just tries to keep the momentum going and tries to make the every move to be a threat. So he plays this, attacking the f6 pawn, and now black plays bishop g7. I think here it's too early to play e5 to defend the pawn like this, because after d, fe there is bishop g5, which can be quite unpleasant because of bishop f6 threats and capturing the pawn. And now if black tries e4, well, there is queen e3, and still white wants to go f3 and break open this position, and the the potential pin on e-file can be a bit too much to handle for black. So I think that Rapport chose wisely, and he played bishop g7, just keeping it together for the moment, and maybe next move can be e5. But first he wants to prepare this properly, and he might want to go e5, bishop g4, which you will see what happened. Now, how does white continue? He chose a very, very nice plan, humanly speaking, but the engine didn't like it, but I like it very much, and it is b3. The point of this move is to go bishop a3 and challenge the knight on e7, which defends the g6 pawn, g6 square, and if you eliminate this knight, it can become really dangerous for black if he's not in the safe zone just yet. And now black has to play very dynamically, very energetically, and he plays e5 now. Now, because of b3, which is played, it weakens the long diagonal, and that's maybe why the engine doesn't like it, because if you compare these two lines, and now bishop g5 is less attractive because of e4, and you lose the knight on c3 by this move. So this may be the only drawback of the move b3, but it appears to be a very important one, because e5 kind of refutes the whole thing. I think if he went with something like, well, rook e1 maybe, or bishop f4, just rook e1, bishop f4 to keep e5 under control, I think he would be fine, but I think b3 was a good try by Mamedyarov. Now Rapport plays e5, and like I said, d5 is not so attractive because of fe and potential e4 threats. But anyways, he plays bishop a3. He's okay with losing the d4 pawn because of rook a e1. And now this guy is gonna suffer a lot. So this is not possible for black. He needs a different way. And in general, in such positions, it's not advisable to open up the position, but you will see what happened. Some crazy stuff happened in this game. First, Rapport plays bishop g4. Okay, that's a very cool move. You attack the queen, you develop. You're going to connect rooks very soon, but you cannot castle actually, because the knight on e7 hangs. Okay, white just goes to g3. Now the bishops are on the same file, and white just wants to play h3 and challenge both bishops. So that's why black plays rook g8. That's okay. White takes on e7, king takes, and now he pins black on the e file. And now Rapport says, okay, I'm gonna just pass and go e4. And at the moment, black's king seems fairly safe. The e file is not open, so there is some barrier between white's rooks and black's king. But now Mamedyarov plays knight a4. He wants to play f3 next, but he couldn't play this immediately because the knight hangs on c3. So he wanted just to step aside with the knight to a safe square and then to go for f3. But now Rapport says, nah, I'm just gonna ignore you. I'm gonna play f5. And at first glance, this seems like a huge blunder because after f3 or h3, you're losing the bishop. Your bishop doesn't have any square, but let's say on h3, black has this nice move, f4. And in case of queen h2, the bishop goes back and he survives. And now it's questionable. Maybe it's even black who has the upper hand because of this open g file, and black successfully managed to keep the position closed in the center. So he might get some play on the g file, and it's not such a pleasant situation for him. So after h3, f4, if you take on f4, there is this move with tempo, rook af8. And if queen d2, there's this issue with bishop h3. Because now if you take bishop h6, we give a check, and also the queen is under attack. So there's that. And after this, if you go back to h2, well, you can go back to d7 and still keep some initiative because of the open g file, and the king will just get to d8 and get to the safe zone, and white's king is the one who has to be scared, let's say. So what to do as white? White can attack the bishop by a move f3, which was played in the game. f3 was played, and now d4 hangs with check. King h1, and still it seems like the bishop is gonna hang. And first of all, I have to give you this line. If bishop takes f3, and now the problem with this move is that the f5 pawn hangs, and then the bishop hangs, and then just everything collapses. Well, that's a load of something. Wait, if bishop takes, queen takes, just wins on spot. Sorry about that. So bishop cannot move, so we just have the same motive, f4, to free the bishop to go to d7 or e6. Now queen takes, because what else? Rook af8, and now he goes back to d2. Of course, here, if it goes to g3, there is bishop d7, and the queen doesn't have any squares to go. So that's bad. It goes to d2. And now bishop f6, just going back. But it looks very scary for black, because rook is on the open file, pinning the king. It's not very pleasing when you see such a position as black. Now white naturally opens up the position by capturing on e4, d4, and now you see the king is in a somewhat tough spot, because the d file is cut off. The e file is very, very loose because of this e4 pawn, which is not defended so well. I mean, only with the queen, but still very shaky. The f file is very unsafe because of the rook on f1 and the potential pin. So this whole situation feels a little bit scary for black, at the very least. But now white's knight on h4 is under attack, and what happens if white goes knight f5, which seems very natural? If black takes rook f5, this can become really interesting very soon. But there is one issue with this whole line, and it's bishop c3. Now the rook on f5 is under attack, the queen is under attack. Eventually rook on e1 is gonna be taken, so this whole thing doesn't work. Because of a very devious move like bishop c3. And if you take on c3 with the knight, rook f5, knight e4, I think just king f7 works out. And I believe that there's no punishment for this. Or even simply rook e5 I think works in this case, unless some queen f4 is there. Queen f4, queen e6. No, I think this should be just fine. Although there is this. I think actually here king f7 is the best option, and the king just gets to the shelter. Because of this, king g6, and because of back rank, there's no time for rook e6. Because of just queen e6 and rook f1 checkmate. You can check this out on your own if you want. But after d4, Mamedyarov took on e4. Basically giving up two rooks for a queen. Also, this was interesting. Knight f3, just keeping all the pieces together, all the pieces on the board. But, you know what? After b6, this knight is very stupid on a4. And the bishop just controls every single square of this knight. c3, b2 is controlled, and if white tries maybe knight d4, there is queen d5, and well, you can go knight f5, but king e6 is just fine, and if takes, this knight is still very bad, and you can go back, but king c6 goes back. And even though white can pick up this pawn, it's not so easy, because after a move like bishop h8, the knight is very badly placed on a4, and also considering the back rank issues, I think black has enough compensation for the pawn because of this very bad knight on a4. So he took on e4, queen takes e4, and now rook e1. This was the point. And there was a funny line here, a very funny line which was missed by Mamedyarov first. At the first moment he played rook e1, and the line was bishop e5, opening up the f file for the rook, using the fact that this is impossible because of rook f1. But there is actually knight c3, and the game is still a draw, an equal game, because when you take on e1, which you have to do, if you go to c6, well, then things become very dodgy, because after rook e5, the king is in such a bad shape, and the knight is gonna jump to d5 or f5 like this, and white's gonna have lots of attack. So this is the best move, I think. Queen e1, and now king d8. Again, relying on this back rank issue. So white would have to go h3, but in that case, takes bishop d7. I'm not sure which side I would pick, because also, even though if you lose the pawn on h5, let's say, you have bishop c6, and once the king steps aside to the safe, to the safety like b8, a8 without any check, then your rooks can become very active. A rook can come to f2. While in this situation, when the king is still out in the open, you have to be careful about loose pieces and checks. And you need some time as white to pick up the pawn, to push the pawns, and still not allow too much counterplay for black. So actually I think I would pick black here. I think that's the right choice for me. But actually the engine says it's like 0-0, but I don't really buy it. But let's go back. Bishop e5 was a funny line, but Rapport took on e1, queen e1, and now it's time to get the king to the safety, king d8. And now h3, the only move. You have to make some luft because black has two rooks and two bishops, which is a very dangerous combination of pieces. And also, without any luft, you might end up being checkmated in the end. So h3 is, because of that, a very natural choice. If white chose to be more ambitious, let's say by including this knight on c5, there is bishop d4 actually. And once this happens, you can take on b7, but after king c8, now bishop f2 becomes a huge threat. And when knight goes back, well, bishop f2 and you're just toast. Or simply bishop c3 as well, because of the back rank issues. I think this might be even better, because after bishop f2 you might have to calculate something along those lines, queen e4 and then some checks. While in this case, after bishop c3, you take on a5 and with only a queen you don't really have any checks. Plus, the f-file makes the queen a bit passive, so the queen would have to stay on the first rank, and it's just hopeless. So he played h3 here, and now Rapport could have gone bishop d7 and after knight c5 to go king c8, and now bishop c6 might be too unpleasant, so probably this is the best. Takes, queen d1, now targeting the h5 pawn, but now after this, queen h5, it's still not really clear what could happen, because if you want to push the pawns on the king side, you have to weaken the king, and then maybe the rooks can exploit that. So it's not such a easy task to win this with white. White is, I would say, slightly better, but black always has these chances for counterplay. So after h3, black didn't go bishop d7, he took on h3, which is insane. And he saw the whole sequence from a few moves before until almost the end. Well, now white is just forced to capture on h3, and now bishop d4 is the point. He wants to go rook g1 and give a checkmate. Well, take the queen, not give a checkmate, goddammit. So, how does white answer to this? How does he do it? In the game, he played queen d1, which was fine. Also, it's possible to go knight g2. But there is a small danger that things can go wrong after rook f3. And now the h-pawn is under attack. Well, if you defend like king h2, now there's danger of rook f2, right? Rook f2, and now the knight just hangs. Also, if you defend like this is checkmating a few moves by this mechanism. Very nice mechanism by just adjusting the bishop to give a checkmate on g3. And actually here, the only move I think which saves the game is queen h4. Trying to relocate the bishop from d4 to f6, because it's loose. And it has to cover bishop f6, and now queen c4. After this rook h g3, and even in this case, white can manage to make a draw, because also black's king is in some trouble because of some potential queen e6 as well, and queen d7. So black can take, but after this, I think black doesn't have anything better, just to repeat moves. Rook e8, well, he can just give checks on the g file and make a draw that way. Because also b7 hangs, and the king might get into some trouble. Because once b7 hangs, a6 also drops, and things can become a bit ugly for black. So I think it's best to just repeat moves by giving checks like this. Because you cannot step on the 4th rank because of rook g4 and losing the queen. So after this, Mamedyarov played queen d1, not knight g2, which was also fine, but now Rapport just bails out with rook g1. We have this endgame with 2 knights against the rook, but for example, if he didn't have these pawns on the king side, and also if the knight was not such a bad piece at the moment, maybe he could have, white could count on some advantage, but this way there was no hope for any advantage because of a very concrete line. Rook f4. Now the knight has to jump back to g2, but now rook f3, and now he attacks the pawn. h4, and now b6. Restricting the knight on a4, and actually white is in some mini zugzwang, because if he moves the king, then rook f2 becomes an option, and things can become a bit problematic for white, at least. So here he chose to go to b2, but black goes here. Rook c3, knight e1, and now we have the repetition of moves, because now the h4 and c2 become huge targets. Knight g2, rook c3, knight e1, rook h3, and after knight g2 they made a draw, and that's how this amazing game finished, in which black seemed completely busted because his king was in the center, and it seemed like at any moment he's gonna collapse because of all the open files and all the heavy pieces that are hitting on these files. But actually, by some concrete calculation, Rapport proved that it was not such a big deal, and it was quite impressive, this performance by Rapport. And if you saw the interview with Mamedyarov after the game, he thought he was winning the whole time, and he seemed very disappointed by the outcome. But actually, when he found out that almost the whole game was perfect by Rapport, besides the opening choice, I would say, and which made him a bit shaky. I think the only moment he had to gain some advantage was after queen c6 here. Like I mentioned, this was a very interesting choice, a very interesting option that white had. 95 and then sack a piece, but just make black pieces very, very bad. After king d7, bishop g5, and white would have lots of compensation for a piece. But actually, yeah, this position looked very, very dangerous for black. And it seemed like a miracle that Rapport saved this game, but actually it was also very impressive that he managed to see all that and to enter this endgame, a rook against two knights. That's it. That's it for this video, for this stream, and I'll see you very soon when I'm gonna cover some games from round 2 as well, also round 3. Games like Aronian Firuzia and Nepomniachtchi Firuzia from round 2. Also, Rapport Deac was a very interesting game, so I'm gonna cover this also, and stay tuned for more videos. Take